Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our Chaos or Calm Building Confidence in the 2024 Election webinar. My name is Azaz Gill. I'm the Pennsylvania Policy Director for Business for America. We are joined this morning by some great panelists, so I'm just going to do a quick little introduction. Our moderator, Jabari Jones, will be doing a more detailed introduction later on. So from Philadelphia County, we have City Commissioner Seth Bluestein, who also used to be my former boss. From Indiana County, we have Commissioner Shireen Hess. From Berks County, we have County Commissioner Christian Leinbach, and moderating this afternoon will be Jabari Jones, who is the president of the West Philadelphia Corridor Collaborative. We also have Ethan Demi, who is the president, I believe, of Demi Learning in Lancaster County. So a very diverse Pennsylvania panel this morning, geographically speaking. So this event was designed so we could hear from both Republicans and Democrat election experts, our county commissioners or city commissioner in Commissioner Bluestein's case, on what policies Harrisburg can enact in the 2023-2024 legislative session so elections in Pennsylvania can run more efficiently, avoid potential chaos, and restore trust. So I want to thank our wonderful co-hosts for this event. These are the issues we're going to be talking about this morning are some really important issues. And it's important to know that we have some good partners who are willing to work with us on these issues. So I want to take some time to thank the Committee of 70, Fair Districts PA, Pennsylvania League of Women Voters, and Poconos Chamber of Commerce for being co-hosts with us on this webinar. Business for America, for those of you who are not familiar, is a national nonpartisan, nonprofit business membership organization working to support a healthy democracy by supporting bipartisan efforts to ensure we have safe, secure, and accessible elections. Business for America also works to reduce polarization and expand civic education. We, of course, invite businesses to partner with us in these noble endeavors. Now, in Pennsylvania, our Back to Business Pennsylvania campaign, in partnership with West Philadelphia Corridor Collaborative, whose President Jabari Jones is moderating for us today, is a nonprofit, nonpartisan coalition of Pennsylvania businesses advocating for election reform, election security, and a revitalized focus on improving Pennsylvania's economy and business climate. So one of the topics we're going to cover today is pre-canvassing. Pennsylvania election code currently does not allow counties to open, prepare, or tabulate mail-in ballots until 7 a.m. on election day. And the County Commissioners Association of Pennsylvania has asked counties be allowed up to 3 weeks in advance to do this. Our panelists are going to cover with you just why they need that time and why it's such an important issue. Codifying laws. There's the way Act 77 was written, and I know Commissioner Leinbach is very passionate about this. It was written in a way that it creates certain inconsistencies in the law, and that leaves individual counties to sometimes interpret how they want to interpret the law. And what we looking to do is codify laws so issues like ballot curing have consistency and aren't just left up to how individual counties want to process them. And then last, we want to give our election administrators the tools to succeed. In Pennsylvania, election administrators utilize a system known as the Statewide Uniform Registry of Electors. It's called the SURE system. The SURE system began in the early 2000s. It was not ready for all the things that Act 77 brought to it. It's in severe need of modernizing, and we're hoping that our election administrators have the tools to succeed, not just for the 2024 election, but also this upcoming 2023 election and elections moving forward. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jabari Jones, who will be moderating this event. Jabari, it's all you.
Thank you, Azaz, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining our conversation today. And I want to thank too, we have a great panelist of county commissioners from across the state that are really going to help us dive into these issues today. I'm looking forward to the discussion we're going to have. On our call with us today, we have Commissioner Bluestein as a city commissioner representing the city of Philadelphia. We have Commissioner Hess, who represents Indiana County in Pennsylvania, as well as Commissioner Leinbach, who represents Berks County, in Pennsylvania as well. We're going to get right into the issues. We have some specific questions that we're going to ask. And then at the end of that, I'm going to allow any of the other commissioners that want to get in on some of those questions or make some points, also the ability to do so. So starting with you, Commissioner Bluestein, Philadelphia is the largest county in Pennsylvania, and therefore it has the most mail-in and absentee ballots to count. Why is the issue of pre-canvassing so important? And what changes would you like to see the state legislature in Harrisburg adopt this year to help improve confidence in elections?
Thank you, Jabari, and thank you both Jabari and Azaz for having us. And before I get into the things that we need to improve upon, I just want to start off on a hopeful note where, we saw some really, potentially positive developments in Harrisburg last week with the legislature and the two parties coming together to elect a Speaker of the House who says he's going to manage the House in an independent way, along with Governor-elect Shapiro's nomination of former Philadelphia City Commissioner Al Schmidt as the Secretary of the Commonwealth in a cross-partisan nomination. So I am cautiously optimistic about a lot of things we're going to talk about today, really making some good progress on that over the next couple of years. So specifically about pre-canvassing, all of the counties have said for years now that we need to improve upon Act 77. And one of the main things that the counties have asked for, both Democratic counties and Republican counties, large counties and small counties, rural counties and urban counties, is having the ability to review and open the ballot envelopes in advance of Election Day. That essentially now with Act 77, we have to manage two separate elections on Election Day, an in-person election and a vote by mail election. And that becomes untenable when you don't have sufficient resources to do so. And in Philadelphia in particular, we went from having between 15 and 20,000 absentee ballots in a presidential election to having 350,000 mail-in ballots in the 2020 election. So we're not just talking about a 2 or 3 times increase. We're talking about a huge number of ballots, a lot of envelopes, and a lot of paper that need to be reviewed and opened. And then the secrecy envelope inside of the declaration envelope has to be opened. Every single ballot has to be unfolded and flattened. And then all of those ballots have to be scanned and tabulated. And to do that in such a small window of time is extremely challenging. Now, the reason this is important for the entire Commonwealth is that we want to know the results of the elections as reasonably as quick as possible. Now, Pennsylvanians and Americans are used to knowing the winner on election night. And what that really meant was an unofficial tally where counties or the states, depending on which state it is, post unofficial results on election night. And then the networks are able to see those results, compile them, and project a winner. But when you have so many mail ballots that are not counted on election night, then that becomes difficult. So what we need to do is be able to get those ballots ready in advance so that we can have them scanned on election day and know as much of the results as possible to shrink that window down where we don't know the results on election night.
I want to invite any of the other panelists, and before I do that, my apologies, Ethan. I just now saw you. My screen was in different areas. We also have one of our BFA council members, advisory council members, Ethan Demi from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, on as well. So I forgot to mention that in our intro. I want to allow any of our other panelists, if they had anything they wanted to add to that, now having the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, just real quickly, Jabari, the pre-canvassing issue, the larger the county, the more significant that issue becomes. What we found, many of the smaller counties and even Berks have been able to manage very well since 2020. 2020 was different because it was the first time we were dealing with it. Both the pre-canvassing on election day and the in-person. I can say with certainty, we wouldn't need weeks in a presidential election, maybe a couple of days prior. But again, one size does not fit all. Pennsylvania is largely a rural state. Most counties are rather small. And Seth, coming from the largest county in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, their challenges are different and legitimately important to not just their community, but to the results statewide. So I agree that it is an important issue. It just varies in importance based on the size of the county.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. I think one thing that's well agreed, especially even for municipal races, being from Philadelphia, the amount of time it now takes to tabulate votes, especially in municipal elections, being something that's going to be very important, especially as the city moves into municipal elections coming up this year in May. Commissioner Leinbach, talking about that, we also have the topic of the statewide uniform registry of elections system that was started to being used in the early 2000s. And we also heard about complaints about it from county boards of elections throughout the states. Can you talk a little bit about what the SURE, the statewide uniform registry of election system is, and why it needs to be updated prior to our 2024 election?
So at the beginning of the program, it was mentioned that the SURE system's been around since early 2000s. And quite frankly, the big issue is its technical issues and lack of reliability. Through the years, it is not uncommon for the SURE system to go down, and by go down, at critical times. This most recent election, the 2022 general election, within days of the election, at least 2 different times, the system went down. What does that mean? It means that counties and election offices that need to access, upload information, download information are unable to access the system. And this is the voter registration database. I'm amazed how many people think that each county has their own database. There is one database for the entire Commonwealth. It is the SURE system. And the biggest problem is its lack of reliability. I could get into more details, but that's part one. Part two has to do with the policy that governs what names are on the list. Prior to my time in office, I'm in my 15th year, so sometime prior to that, it used to be very simple. If you as a voter didn't vote once every 4 years, at the end of that 4-year period, you were removed. So whatever the factor was, you moved and it didn't get through the system, a person passed away, it was 4 years max and they were removed. Under new regulations, or new since right before I came into office, it can take up to 8 years, and there are active voters and inactive voters, and a lot of the problems and confusion that is created by third parties. This could be Republicans, Democrats, campaigns, or other third-party efforts, purchasing a list, not understanding active versus inactive voters, not purging the list, maybe using a list that they had last year, and then sending out applications or promotions. And right away, voters immediately assume, because they got an application for a mail-in ballot to their spouse who passed away 2 years ago, that there's voter fraud going on. And what it really is a list that isn't as clean as it should be, because the rules had been changed. And it's also because third-party purchasers of the voter database, in my opinion, aren't as careful as they should be in looking at voting history and contacting the right people. But the SURE system is something that the County Commissioners Association has been advocating for some time, needs to be updated both on the technical side from a software standpoint so that it's more reliable, and the rules around purging the list to make the list as clean and as current as possible.
Really important. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Hess, I want to go to this issue a little bit about drop boxes, which has been a hot button issue, an issue that's been talked about a lot, throughout the state. And I know that the legislatures are eyeing, how this might be able to be implemented. With all the misinformation that's out there surrounding this issue, how safe do voters in your county, in Indiana County, feel, and what you might be hearing across the Commonwealth about using drop boxes to drop off their ballots?
Well, thanks, Jabari, and thank you to Business for America for the opportunity to be part of this panel. I love to talk about elections, administration, and all of that goes along with it. And I fully concur with my two colleagues who have spoken, and it's on the topics that they have spoken about. And it's very apparent there's a lot that goes on in the background to make an election happen. But counties take this very seriously. It is one of the things that we are really required to do by the county code. There are a lot of things that we do that aren't required, but we do them for the betterment of our communities. But this one is absolutely required, and we take it very seriously. So thank you for such a great topic. And for all those who are listening, I thank you for caring about this topic. I think we can all agree that a strong democracy is good for business. But that strong democracy doesn't happen by accident. It is underpinned by secure, safe, fair elections. And I think we all want high levels of participation in those elections. So I know every business owner that I know, every business that I know wants to support their employees' right to vote. And they want to be assured that our elections are legitimately run. That's been a challenge. And you said a word there, misinformation. And I would also throw out the word disinformation in the last few years related to elections. And then COVID has been also presented many, many barriers and challenges in terms of elections administration. But I'll tell you what, our election administration folks got it done in these last years under the most awful circumstances, the most unprecedented circumstances. They got it done. They delivered safe, secure, fair elections. I believe the business community can be a strong model for civic mindedness, the leadership that we need to keep our elections fair and safe. So a little bit about drop boxes. If you're not familiar, this is something that was permitted for the first time for counties to have that option to place drop boxes around their county by Act 77. But as we've talked about, the law was not very clear about what counties can and cannot do regarding them, except for one particular item, and that is that a voter may place their ballot and only their ballot into these boxes. Except there are some provisions for those persons with disabilities. But for folks who just do, for whatever reason, don't want to use the courthouse drop-off or go through the postal service, this is an option. And it's really an option about expanding access for often people with who are the most vulnerable in our communities. This is a way to expand that access. And there are many benefits to drop boxes. You may have our working class folks who have hours of work, or they've got parent care or child care duties that really prevent them from accessing, the normal courthouse hours. You have folks again where this has been very valuable, including the community with people with disabilities, people who have transportation issues in these neighborhoods where boxes are sited and within walking distance. That's a huge advantage for some folks who don't have vehicles, and those communities exist in great numbers in Pennsylvania. So frankly, this is expanded access for people who are really the vulnerable ones and might otherwise miss their opportunity. But with the question of should voters feel safe using drop boxes, I think yes, that they should. And there are many reasons that I'd like to just talk a little bit about. The counties did it in the 2020 presidential election with success. We've proved that it is, counties were not required to do it, but those who did it with success. These are very safe and secure devices, apparatuses. They are tamper-proof, they are waterproof, etc. There are many security measures in place. There's a detailed, or should be a detailed, chain of custody procedures for those officials who are handling those ballots. There are often county staff and even sheriff deputies who are at these drop-off locations. These are secure ballot drop boxes placed in public locations and emptied by trained professional staff. So, to say that there are many, many eyes on this process too is an understatement. Really, there are so many steps to it and many eyes on those steps. And even before people cast their ballot, their mail-in application is a highly vetted operation. The machines that will ultimately count these ballots are calibrated, pre-tested. And even after the counts have been made and the election is finished, there are risk-limiting audits that are performed. There are many steps that make fraudulent activity very, very difficult. And when, on the rare occasion that people are caught, they are prosecuted, and there are some harsh penalties. So to conclude, they're safe, they're secure. There are detractors making unsubstantiated claims about, ballot harvesting, some odd discoveries, but there are sensible explanations for the very few things that have been questioned. Mistakes can happen, but it does not mean that something nefarious is occurring. So I think we all have a role, including the business community, of encouraging our legislature to come up with common sense solutions, and they do exist, to clarify the law. Where the code is silent, let's get some clarification. And, like, for instance, regarding drop boxes, how many per capita, the staffing arrangements, things like that, so that we can have a consistent arrangement across the state, because that is what contributes to a fair and secure election and gives voters the trust that they need to know that there is integrity to our elections. So we just want the legislature, hopefully, to work with counties to understand that we want to be their partner. We want to help engender that trust that is needed, because the business community, we all need that. We need to know that our elections are working. So I guess I'll conclude just to say that this is a very important topic. The business community has a role to play. And again, I thank you all who are listening. And I thank my colleagues for their very wise comments about elections. And I'll end it there, and thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And also, speaking of our business community, we have one of our BFA Business Council Advisory Council members on, Mr. Ethan Demi. And I want to go to you, sir, and ask, why should businesses and people across the Commonwealth care about the pre-canvassing issue and some of the other issues that have already come up so far? And what's your take on how these changes on making voting more accessible, on how that might have some impact on our economy?
Yeah, thanks, Jabari. So I run a small education publishing company, about 60 employees in Lancaster County. We're in the business of building lifelong learners. And to us, a healthy democracy is the best system to ensure that people have the freedom to learn. And to have that healthy democracy means a system of rules and laws that allow businesses, small businesses like mine, to grow and thrive. So a healthy free enterprise system depends not only on the rule of law, but also the public perception that our system of government is strong and trustworthy. So, and right now that perception is what is under attack. I would say now we have a level of polarization in this country, in this state, where we have this outsized incentive for politicians to sort of call into question or beg the question. So when they start to see vote counts coming in slower in some counties than other, you just beg the question. You don't have to go outright and say there's fraud happening in Philadelphia. So why does it take them so long to count in Philadelphia? When the politician's saying that, know full well that it is different counting in Philadelphia than it is in Berks or Lancaster. And so that perception is a big thing that cleaning up and allowing pre-canvassing would really go a long way in both streamlining and giving flexibility to local county governments to count better, but also from a business community standpoint, it it allows my employees to know that, hey, my vote's going to get counted. I can go vote, and then I can watch the election results come in, and I see that in close to real time. And it just builds that trust. And that's what we want at the end of the day, is we want a healthy, vibrant community where people know that and trust the fact that their vote's going to get counted, and they have a say. That's really what people want. We may disagree with our politicians, and that's what makes democracy great. But people need to know that their voice is heard, and the ballot box is the best way for that. So both just making it easier to administer elections is good for democracy and business, but also that perception is really key, where people can know really deep down that their vote is being counted.
I mean, I think we've heard repeatedly from businesses across many of the events that we've had, the importance of knowing who your representative is. It gives businesses a sense of stability because they can kind of predict the kind of policies that their lawmakers might be championing, the kind of efforts that they may want to support from a legislative stance or from an appropriation stance, and how that those activities might be able to have a real bottom line business cost at the end of the day, that businesses want to be able to have some stable confidence in going into elections. Thank you so much, Ethan. I want to remind everybody, all of our participants listening, that the chat is open. So if you have any questions, you can put those questions in the chat, and we will have some time to get to a few of those. So you can just use the Q&A feature here. Commissioner Lineback, I think you said you had something, or
Yeah, I just following up, and this applies to both of the questions in the chat. I really believe that the biggest issue when it comes to election integrity and the voters' ability to trust the system is that we need some significant election reforms to Act 77. We've touched on drop boxes. Drop boxes aren't even mentioned in Act 77. Some people assume that means they're illegal. Well, that's not the case at all. But there needs to be clear rules that everybody's following. The ballot curing question in 2020, right before the election, then Secretary Bachvar sent out a communication about ballot curing. I can tell you with certainty, most county solicitors and election board solicitors looked at that communication, looked at the law, and said, you can't do that. There needs to be clarity on what is acceptable in ballot curing. It can't be one county does it one way, one county doesn't do it at all. You look at dated or misdated outer envelopes of mail-in and absentee ballots. The law seemed relatively clear. It said the outer envelope shall be signed and dated. It didn't say what date it should be, but it's signed and dated. In the primary, ultimately, the courts ruled it doesn't have to be dated. A week before this last general election, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled, after many people had their ballots in, that, oh yes, not only does it need to be dated, the date has to be a date between these two time periods. And the rules changed. We absolutely need the legislature, the new leadership, and the governor and his administration to look at Act 77 and clean it up so we all know what the rules are, and so voters know and understand that what's happening in Juniata County, the rules they're operating under are the same as Berks, the same as Philadelphia. That is not the case today, and it opens us wide to a lack of voter trust and to claims of fraud, even when it's much more a case of a lack of consistency in the law. And one last thing I will say, this is what happens when legislatures and governors put together legislation and pass it without bringing in the people that have to actually do the work. And those are county election boards and county leaders.
I think that's something too that our business community knows well about, the importance of legislators talking to the people that are going to be most affected by policies before they are implemented. Commissioner Bluestein, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think that's a great point about how businesses and local election administrators have a very similar perspective about the need for clarity in advance so that everybody's on the same page, knows what to expect. It's how you're able to invest and grow in your business the same way we can invest in our operations. And one of the changes that we talked about at the beginning related to pre-canvassing, that will also allow everybody to have additional transparency and accessibility, just like drop boxes. You have clarity on drop boxes, you can have that accessibility, and every county is doing it the same way, whether it's curing, by having more time to have the ballots in hand and to be able to work with them. You can have additional time for, if the legislature makes it clear that we can allow voters to correct minor mistakes on those envelopes. And then when it comes to transparency, when we are processing hundreds of thousands of ballots in one day, by necessity, we have to have over 100 temporary employees. We're moving at very fast speeds. If we want to have better visibility into how these operations work, by doing it at a slower pace over a longer period of time, it allows people to have more comfort and trust in the process because they'll be able to see it better. So I think all of these topics are interrelated in that way, where really you need clarity and you need transparency and you need accessibility. And these things don't have to be at odds. All these things can complement each other when done the right way. And it starts, as Christian said, it starts with the legislature and the governor and the Department of State actually speaking with and talking with local election officials and county commissioners in advance as they're drafting what these new changes could look like.
And I want to, for the audience purpose, talk about a question that was put in the chat, specifically around pre-canvassing. And there's been a concern that's been expressed in some of the mainstream outlets that if you have pre-canvassing and the early results of the mail-in ballots or dropped-off ballots are leaked, if people can kind of see in real time what that vote count is, it could potentially influence people that haven't voted yet. And maybe I'll start you off too with this one, Commissioner Hess, if you have any insight or ideas or thoughts about how the legislature might be able to do pre-canvassing while at the same time addressing that concern.
Yeah, I agree. That's a concern. I think that the law, whatever the clarification, has to be very clear, and also there have to be penalties if that would happen. But again, I think that there are so many eyes on the process that you know, those kinds of things really can be curtailed. I think that the employees, the folks who do, they're trained professionals, and they do, you know, they will take the steps necessary to prevent that from happening. And I also think, and I want to, you know, I go back to the co-sponsors. There are a lot of good government groups out there that I think play a role in educating citizens, and that's what, you know, the League and Fair Districts are all about, educating citizens and businesses and all the different sectors of the community. Everybody has a responsibility to play a role in good elections administration as well. So I think it's, you know, businesses can encourage their employees to become educated, to make a voting plan, to publicly support safe and secure elections. You know, to hear it from a business means a lot, is a different dynamic than from hearing it from a county commissioner. So I just want to encourage our listeners to take those steps as well.
Commissioner Linebuck.
Yeah, and Jabari, when we look at the issue of pre-canvassing and totals, pre-canvassing doesn't have to necessarily include tallying the votes. It could do everything right up to not everything but the tally, and literally 7 o'clock on election morning, having those ballots ready to go. The reality is, since 2020, we've had our mail-in ballot results done by late afternoon. Actually, 2022 general, we were done at 2 o'clock. We had 30-some thousand complete counted. we didn't release anything until the in-person precinct results were released, and we then released those results together. So it's a matter of rules. If you don't address something, then you're going to have some counties doing it one way, another county doing it another way. But it is a legitimate concern that was raised. We don't want results released before 8 p.m. on election night. Any attempt to do that, in my mind, whether intentional or not, would have a negative effect on voting results. So that needs to be dealt with in the law.
But Commissioner, to your point, we've done it. It's been done with success. So,
Correct.
and you're right on.
Yeah, and
As-
I think the strongest argument about that not being a true concern is there are states across the country that do weeks of pre-canvassing, and we don't hear about them releasing results early. There's no leaks. The counties, as Christian just said, some of the counties finish their results in the middle of the day on election day and don't release their results early. So if the law is written with the proper penalties in place, that's not really a major concern that I have. That being said, if it is a concern, then doing the preparation of the ballots in advance and just not allowing the tabulation portion of it until election day is more than enough, even for Philadelphia and Allegheny. One of the things I was going to say earlier in the conversation about the differences between, the larger, more populous counties and the smaller rural counties in the scale of mail ballots is that also impacts the cost and the types of technology you need to use to effectuate the opening and review of those ballots. In some counties, it may require 10 temporary employees, and they can use letter openers and open them by hand. Whereas in Philadelphia or Allegheny or Montgomery, you're using industrial sorters like they would use in a post office, and you're using automated extraction equipment that have to be operated by humans, but they're machine assisted in opening. The number of tabulators that we have compared to some other counties is much larger. So we can, if needed, work with the legislature and the governor to find the right compromise to allow pre-canvassing in some form, whether it's 3 weeks or 3 days, whether it includes tabulation or doesn't include tabulation. All of that is negotiable. But what we all know at the county level, every single county, is that if you go into 2024 having done nothing, you're setting up a risk of having the same problems that we had in 2020. So something has to get done, but what that looks like can all be a conversation.
And if I can jump in, I think the key is that legislation needs to be a bipartisan effort. I'm a Republican. I'm mentioning that because of what I'm going to cite. House Bill 1300, and then later in the last term, House Bill 1800 were touted as election reform bills. But if you looked at them, what they were, they had everything in the kitchen sink in them. They weren't real election reform. They were political tools for one party, the Republican Party, to be able to say, see, the governor won't sign election reform. That's not what we need. And there is no bill right now. We're at the beginning of a new session. So now's the perfect time for House leadership, Senate leadership, and the governor, when he comes on, and Al Schmidt, who will be our new Secretary of the Commonwealth, to pull together, look at what we have and say, what are the priorities on election reform? What can we agree on right away and get it done? Because the sad reality is, since 2020, there has been almost no election reform. Act 88 was passed. That's affected a very small area, and it was beneficial. Don't get me wrong. But the things we're talking about haven't been touched. Ballot curing, drop boxes, naked ballots, dated versus undated, and the list, it goes way beyond that. We need a bipartisan effort, and we need it as quickly as possible. We're focused, right? We are focused on 2023, but these are going to be big issues, not just in 2023, but as we come into 2024. And if we haven't addressed any reform between now and this time next year, 2024 is going to be a real serious problem.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I want to go bring up another question specifically for you, Commissioner Bluestein. One of the things that Philadelphians specifically found really convenient in 2020 was early in-person voting by mail centers, so satellite offices opened by the commissioner's office where people could feel secure that they were handing their ballot specifically to an official from the commissioner's office. Do you foresee a return to these in 2024? And were there any issues that you'd like the legislature to look at as they consider election reform this year?
Yeah, so that's another one of those areas where, Act 77 wasn't extremely clear, and it required guidance from the Department of State to make clear what they believed was allowed and, after litigation is allowed to move forward. And essentially what Act 77 said was that individuals can go to the county election board office and submit their application, receive their ballot back at the same time, and vote it and turn it back in. So in Philadelphia in 2020, we opened multiple temporary offices around the city, geographically distributed, so that voters throughout the county had an opportunity to do that. Because especially in 2020, at the heart of the pandemic, voters were concerned about going to their polling place and having long lines, but also there were concerns about the post service. So this is kind of the opportunity for voters to get a mail ballot and turn it in without having that concern. It's going to take resources to open offices throughout the city. So every election since 2020, we have had City Hall open. That is our primary location where that type of early in-person mail ballot receipt and turning it back in can occur. But we haven't opened additional offices beyond City Hall for a couple of reasons. One, the demand hasn't been there. So you can see even with the number of voters who have used our City Hall office, it hasn't been as busy. Now, this general election, it started to approach a lot busier. So you could see in a midterm general, there could be need for other offices. But at the end of the day, in order for us to open up additional offices in 2024, we're going to need to have additional resources allocated for that.
Great. And I want to address a question that was also in the chat. And I'm so glad that seeing this kind of questions really really good. Somebody asked which committees in Harrisburg specifically look at voter related legislation. And those are the state government committees, both in the Senate and in the House, that consider these kinds of bills, which is really glad to see those kinds of conversations. Hopefully we get from our business community some advocacy, that you have conversations with the elected officials that represent you and your district about how important these kinds of issues are. I'm going to finish this up. I know we're coming up on time, but I want to ask one final question to all of our panelists. I know that we all talked about a number of issues. If you could choose one issue that the state legislature would focus on, one particular type of bill, one particular part of election reform that you believe is the most crucial going into our 2024 election, what would that be? And I'd love to hear from all of our panelists. Why don't I start with Commissioner Linebuck? You want to start us off?
Yeah, I'll save you some time. I've already said it. I believe we need the governor and both the House and Senate leadership to get together on a serious election reform bill. That's the biggest thing that we can do for election security, election integrity, and restoring confidence overall. If we don't do that, I think anything else is largely a piecemeal solution.
Ethan, you want to go next?
Sure, I'll be a little more broad here. I think the best thing Harrisburg can do is listen to this call. This election we have this year is the most important one that's going to impact every business and every employee and every person. So your local races are the most important. And these are the folks, Commissioner Bluestein, Hess, and Linebuck on this call. different parties who are willing to come together and say, we need an attitude of compromise. Let's get in the room. Let's get something done. If Harrisburg could replicate the attitude on this call from these commissioners in Harrisburg, that would be my wish for the year.
Thanks, Ethan. Commissioner Hess.
Well, I would concur with all of that. We really are in need of impartial, unbiased, objective election law, and it can be done. The solutions are there. We know that the people are there to do it. So that's my wish as well, is that we get this some election law that is allows us to get back to the business of people trusting their elections administration.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Bluestein.
Yeah, I agree with my colleagues that, ideally we would have a large compromise legislation that makes all of these topics clearer. At the end of the day, though, I don't want piecemeal bills, but the one thing that I know Philadelphia desperately needs before 2024 is the pre-canvassing. So if no larger package could be put together, at the bare minimum, we need to have a compromise on what pre-canvassing looks like and make some improvements there.
Thank you, Commissioner. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today and for this great conversation. Before I turn it back over to Aizaz to close us out, I also want to thank our audience for tuning in, for being interested about this issue, for your willingness, it looks like, to have some of these conversations with your legislators in our home district. And I also want to thank our supporters of our Getting Back to Business campaign, specifically the Heinz Endowments and the William Penn Foundation, who are providing some funding to be able to help us have these conversations and organizing businesses across multiple counties as it relates to some of these really good government reforms. So at this time, I'm going to pass it back over to Aizaz to clear us out.
All right. Well, I just want to thank all our speakers for being wonderful. I thought this was a great conversation. And Ethan, thanks for suggesting that everyone should listen to this call. We're going to have this entire panel up on YouTube. So if you want to share it with your local legislator, if you want to pass it, post it on social media, we'd love it. The more people in Harrisburg listen to what county commissioners are saying, the better chance we have at getting some serious election reform done. So thank you so much for attending today. If there's anything in here that you had more questions about, or if you'd like to work with Business for America on any of these issues, please reach out. My contact information is on the screen right now. My email is aizaz@bfa.us, AIZAZ @bfa.us. So thank you so much again, Commissioner Hess, Commissioner Leinbach, Commissioner Bluestein, Jabari for moderating, and Ethan from joining us from Lancaster County. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll be in touch.